Hello, I'm Nick Villapiano, the Director of Front-End Development at One North, a digital experience agency based out of Chicago. We're also a signature service agency of Figma. And we were early adopters to Figma going all the way back to 2017. And if the name sounds familiar at all, we've been busy writing articles about Figma, both on our blog and on the Signal blog, the Shortcut blog. We have been doing meetups in New York and Chicago, and my colleague Jessica was even on this stage at Config last year talking about some of our work with United Airlines. And one of the cool things about One North is that front-end development doesn't sit under technology, but rather under design. And I love this approach, and not just because all the cool kids and best dressers are in design and I get to osmose and lay in their wake and get 1% cooler, but it also does really foster that creative collaboration that's necessary to build modern, meaningful experiences. And this unorthodox approach really resonates with me because my journey to front-end development itself was pretty unorthodox. Like a lot of front-end developers, before I came into this, I was, doing something else in my career. For me, I was lucky enough to spend my 20s as a professional musician. Here I am up on stage at Lollapalooza, no doubt laying down a tasty bass groove. It was pretty cool. We were pretty successful. Big festivals like this, we toured the US and Canada and Europe. We had a major label deal, all of these cool things. Don't mistake this for a brag, though, because for every high, there was a reminder of just how much we hadn't made it, like that time we got second billing to a buy one, get one breakfast deal in Virginia Beach. I love a good bargain as much as anybody. I'm not going to say no to an omelet, but we couldn't get top billing on this? Come on. So this life was cool and exciting, don't get me wrong, but it was pretty clear that it wasn't going to be a sustainable career for me, and eventually I would have to figure out something else. I've always been super into tech, and I got really caught up in the early internet. The web was way less complex back then, and you could learn pretty much anything you needed about a website by just doing right-click view source. You want to see how somebody built out their HTML, go check it out, how something was styled, that interesting click functionality that you saw, just check out the JS file, or probably just the script tag that had the JS in it. Everything was open, available, and in a non-obfuscated way. And this boundless version of the internet really fascinated me. I was able to learn front-end development by kind of checking out other people's code, how they went about things, trying things out for myself, and eventually was able to cobble together more and more knowledge, start my career, and eventually land me on this stage today. It's really freaky. It was clear even back then that the internet, by its very nature, was collaborative and communal, with compatibility baked right into its core. And it was designed to build bridges and create connections. The barrier of entry was just a web browser, and if you want to code, like a text editor, notebook. And by contrast, today's web is as much a maze as it is a marvel. With countless JS frameworks and methodologies and libraries, fragmentation is inevitable, and people everywhere are grappling with the chaos of a space that's evolving faster than they can keep up. And this explosion of usage has led to a lot of tools that were being introduced to, add functionality. So you'll have a new tool come out that gives you this new cool thing you can do, but it also adds new complexity. So a new tool comes in and says, hey, maybe we can simplify that added complexity was added. But now that's the norm, and there's another tool, and this never-ending explosion of all this stuff can really be chaotic and feel like a never-ending arms race. Thank you, bugs. Figma, in my opinion, is one of those countermeasures against the chaos. And since their launch, they have been inviting collaboration, breaking down silos, allowing teams to work in new connected ways that were never possible before, and kind of bridging that natural chasm between all of our disciplines. Not only that, but they keep on releasing new cool features too, Dev mode and Code Connect last year. Actually, I was here at Config last year when it was announced, and I was so stoked. I could not wait to get started on Code Connect. It seemed so cool. I just wanted to hop in and check it out. And being the supportive sweethearts that they are, Figma gave us a whole dang design system to check it out, the simple design system. And it had Code Connect integrated right out of the box. I love that they did this because it meant that, we could check out this already prepackaged product that would somewhat simulate what our experience would be without having to initialize it and do our configurations, all of those little barriers. You could jump right in. And that's what we did. We grabbed it and we jumped right in. But there was a little snag, though, a piece of fine print that we didn't notice before. Can you all see it? I don't know if you can see it from there. Hey, Tech, can we get a zoom in on this, please? There it is. Only if you're using React. Code Connect at launch only supported one JS library, React. But making your MVP in React makes a ton of sense, right? According to this graphic, I don't know where we found it, 52% of all front-end jobs require React experience. Shockingly low, actually, in my opinion. So choosing React for your MVP, your starter, absolute no-brainer. But at One North, we had a much more variety in the languages we were supporting. So in fact, at that time, in addition to React, we were really heavily invested into Vue. And this made making that leap into Code Connect, even with simple design system provided to check it out, feel really limiting for us. Code Connect was clearly this powerful tool, and SDS was a well-built expression of it, but it frankly didn't track for us. And again, no shade, I get it. You have to have an MVP, and the modern landscape is just too tectonic to cover everybody's needs all at once. And as a member of this other 48% here, it got us thinking about our own technology decisions. Again, we mainly used Vue. We also supported a bunch of React and Angular. We even had legacy applications in Knockout and jQuery. And this decision to kind of go heavy into Vue and disperse our knowledge was starting to look like a misstep, kind of like we missed the boat on React. But it's not like the web is done evolving, right? And while React is the top dog today, it wasn't that long ago, probably back when I was at Lollapalooza, that jQuery was the undisputed king. And it got us thinking, can we broaden our spectrum of support and understanding without creating all this duplicative work? Is there a way that we can use technology to kind of unify our decisions instead of chasing the endless game of frameworks? You might have guessed it, enter web components. So web components are technology that developers can use to create reusable, self-contained HTML elements that work across all modern browsers. Unlike traditional components that are tied to a framework, web components can be used without any kind of framework, no React Angular, all on their own, making them incredibly versatile. I kind of like to think about it like USB cables. If you have a USB port on your device, you know that any USB cable is going to work for it. You don't have to think about what's the brand or if there's proprietary technology. It just, it's a standard, so it works. They're also deeply compatible. So not only do they not depend on a framework to work, but they can work independently and into any framework as well. Again, since they're a web standard, anywhere that the web works, they work. Just like the core technologies that they're built with, HTML, CSS, and JS. Once built, web components can be reused infinitely, anywhere you want. They can reduce duplication and aid in efficiency, all of the kinds of things that you would expect from design system components. Really similar in nature. You can have a web component for a dropdown and utilize it across all of your applications. They're also encapsulated, and this is a really important and like kind of weird concept. So each web component is like its own self-contained little universe. And I kind of like to think about it as like namespacing in CSS, if you're familiar. When you namespace in CSS, you're essentially creating like an individual scope for those styles. So what you're authoring only affects those specific things. And this encapsulation means that nothing can spill into web components and nothing can go out. And it's really important to their compatibility. This means that there's like no style conflicts, no unexpected behavior, everything remains within that one part. So let's check them out in practice. We'll use like a simple accordion component to demonstrate how to kind of create and initialize a web component. So for the sake of this example, we're going to have a JS file. We're going to call it accordioncomponent.js. Then using JavaScript, we are going to name it with a class accordion that we're going to turn into an HTML element. Then in the shadow DOM is where we're going to add all of our HTML structure. So here we have like a containing div accordion, a button class that's going to work as like our toggle for that accordion, and then accordion body, which is what's going to be like dynamically hidden and shown. And then finally, we have to define the component at the bottom here, give it a name. In our case, simple accordion-element. Inside the same code, we're going to add some styling. So using that style tag, we'll add some CSS for this. And since it's an accordion, we need some click function, so we'll add some JS here as well. Again, this should look just like normal JavaScript because it's normal JavaScript, you know, web standards. Now that everything is set up, we have our file all looking good. Let's add it into our project. So here we have like a super stripped down HTML file. And down here, we're going to include our accordion component.js, that file we were just working on, making it available in our project. And then to use it, we just add that like an HTML element. And that's pretty much it, honestly. They're super cool, really easy to use, easy to set up. And even though like I've just shown like the dumb parts of it, they also include some other features that you may be used to in framework components. So like, for example, we're using slots here. We're going to create like a slot name for accordion header with a default value. And then when we're including that into our file, we have a span with that slot there that is now using our example text. So, you know, pretty powerful, pretty cool, really nice to use. And the syntax for including them in the various frameworks is all the same, right? So vanilla accordion element, React accordion element, Angular accordion element, et cetera, et cetera. Hopefully at this point, you're starting to feel persuaded to the benefits of web components. You know, again, I think that they're very cool, but they're not without their limitations. And I'm not just going to sit up here and sell you like the rosy picture. So let's talk about some of their shortcomings. First off is that concept of style encapsulation. Since, as I mentioned before, they're like these self-contained universes, that means that it's very difficult to share styles across components because there's no natural inheritance that we expect from CSS. And we know that like we can use CSS variables for some of this. Those can be inherited, but those are only going to give you like variable values. We can have like a shared color. That's cool, but that's like not really a style. So especially if you're like thinking about using these for your design system components, you're going to have to reframe how you think about creating that consistency of styles across them. And yeah, this really tripped me up when I first started working on it, and I almost like threw them out wholesale, if I'm being honest. Second is developer productivity. What I mean by this is that some sacrifices had to be made in order to keep web components as compatible as they are, being able to use anywhere. And some of the things that we take for granted in frameworks, like TypeScript, for example, and state management, we can't utilize those because they're not a native web technology. But it's 2025, and we all write in TypeScript now. So hopping back and forth is going to be like a context change. You're probably going to be like, I don't really love using these, etc., creating like a strained developer experience. And then finally, even though they are very compatible, each framework does have its like little quirks around how they like to do things, or like expected setup and stuff like that. So things like data binding and event handling in particular mean that like passing props and emitting custom events may cause friction and require some additional configuration. In my opinion, though, these aren't deal breakers. And like I mentioned up top, we're in this like never-ending cycle of tooling, right? Something new comes out, it has its pitfalls, and then something else comes out that makes it a little bit easier to use. And I know I've kind of been talking all this back about frameworks, but it's actually a framework that's going to allow you to get around these limitations with web components. So Stencil is a web component framework made by the Ionic team that helps reduce the friction experienced when using raw web components. In fact, Stencil, if used correctly, can mitigate all of the limitations that we just talked about. So first up, styling encapsulation. There's no magic wand that we can do. No framework can get around that like inheritance problem. But since there is like a build step with Stencil, we can utilize Sass. So if we wanted to have like a variant in our accordion that added a button for whatever reason, we could just like go ahead and have that button Sass partial with a mixin for the style, and then include that within our main component, practically sharing the styles back and forth. And the dips in dev productivity, well, Stencil supports TypeScript. So here you can see we're using like decorators for component and state, prop, event. We have some state management going on. Again, bringing us closer to that like modern 2025 expected developer experience. Vanilla.js rules, TypeScript also rules. And this gives us like additional definitions for like metadata, IntelliSense, et cetera, really unlocking what we expect from the modern environment. And navigating the framework challenges in particular is where I think Stencil shines above everything else. And this is by utilizing a feature that they have called output targets. So output targets take your compiled web component library and automatically wraps them in like different versions of the various JS framework flavors. So like right here, we have it for React, Angular, and Vue. And you can see right away the differences between them, right? So in React, and in Vue, we've changed the casing from kebab case to Pascal case, which is like the nomenclature that those frameworks prefer. Angular is chill. They're like, we're cool with kebab. So nothing changed there. Also, you can see the way that events are handled is different in all three as well. So React has that on accordion toggle. Angular has the accordion toggle parenthetical, and Vue has that at accordion toggle. So this means that like even though there are actually web components in a web component library, you can create these versions that feel like they're just the natural extensions of a React component, of an Angular component. Doesn't throw you off or like, give you something unexpected. And by addressing these limitations, we can see how web components can be both broad and universal, while also specific to needed usage. They can, be used anywhere on their own. If you want to just fly rogue, not do anything else, you're totally cool. Or they can be adapted in a way to mimic framework components that you're already used to. This means that you can have one managed code base that supports HTML, React, Angular, and Vue in a non-disruptive way without, a ton of duplicative effort. And formally isolated teams with varied technological backgrounds can now work from one singular instance, one shared context, and, they all have the same names of stuff. They all have the same props, all the same variants, all the same colors. You're all using the same documentation, and all it takes is using the web component library. No like special considerations for any of those things. And like just really opening it up to a wide swath of devs, just sharing, again, one singular context. But don't take my word for it. We don't have to live in the theoretical. Launching today is a refactor of Figma's simple design system built by our team at One North. We wanted to try our hand at creating this like one-to-many library approach. and to demonstrate the best of this technology. And not only did we want to refactor the basic componentry and the main library, but we also made sure to have Code Connect enabled for all of these. So if you go to that Code Connect dropdown, you're going to have it for web components, Vue, Angular, and React, and it'll all look like that kind of natural code that you're already using. And even though we did this, frankly, for our own research benefits and to figure stuff out, we wanted to do our part, and we're inspired to give a crumb back to the community, this giant sea of a community of tooling from which we've all benefited from so much. After all, the internet is a beautiful thing, and it connects us and allows for this free exchange of knowledge that I personally have benefited from tremendously. The web is super complex, and we'll never get back to those simple Wild West days of the early net. But along with that complexity, there are more pathways for communication and more community and collaboration than ever before. And I sincerely believe that web components, if utilized well, can be a force in enabling more devs from more backgrounds with more varied expertise to all share their experiences together and build one better version of tomorrow's web. Finally, I didn't do any of this on my own. I got to give a couple shout-outs. First to Craig and George from United, who introduced Stencil to everybody. Jimmy, who unlocked output targets for us. Jake and Louie, who created the simple design system from Figma. Miko, Lucas, Louis, and Jimmy for doing the main refactor. Jenny, who's with me today, was our beta tester. And finally, also with me today, Paul Evangelista, who created this incredible, beautiful deck. Thank you all so much.